Okay, hi everyone. It is 4 o'clock. We'll go ahead and get started to honor your time. Welcome to our session today, and thank you for joining us on this afternoon of the second day of the conference. We'll each introduce ourselves as we begin each part of the presentation, and to ensure that we have the necessary time, let's hold off all questions until the end, please. I'm sure you've seen this slide. The Charleston Conference would like to remind everyone about the Code of Conduct, and we want to make sure that this presentation is accessible to all. So if you do have any questions at the end, be sure to use the microphone and announce who you are and where you're from so other people will know that too. Here's the basic agenda. We have 3 libraries. This is an update from a presentation we did last year. Do we have any attendees who were here last year for the presentation? Thank you for joining us again. We'll each provide details about where we were in our presentation briefly last year, where we are today, and potentially where we're going in the future. I'm Terry Brandsma. I'm the Information Technology Librarian, AKA the Systems Librarian at UNC Greensboro. This is an interesting conference for me to attend because I'm not involved in licensing or purchasing or anything. I just make sure that it works after we buy it. UNC Greensboro is a medium-sized research university. We have almost exactly 18,000 students right now, which is a little bit of a reduction pre-pandemic. Several years ago, the North Carolina State Legislature allocated $81 million for a library renovation, and they recently added an additional $17 million for cost increases for construction and materials. Our main library, as you can see, is the short 3-story brick building there, was built in the late 1940s and was opened in early 1950. The 9-story concrete structure was added in the early 1970s and was opened in 1973. We haven't had any significant renovation since then, except for a connector to our student union that was completed in 2006. So we needed, really badly, a full interior renovation to comply with safety and accessibility requirements that have been enacted since the 1970s. Our renovation timeline is generally on track. Design development is essentially complete, with ongoing construction documents being drafted as we speak, and hopefully finalized and approved by the many layers since we are a state institution. Adjustments have been made for potential cost overruns, and the bidding processes will start early next year. Phase 1 is the overhaul of the 1970s tower and is expected to take about 17 months to complete, and then it will be reopened again for use. Phase 2 will be the renovation of the original 1950s building and is expected to take another 15 months after that, with the anticipation of reopening our fully renovated library in early 2028. So that's a full 3 years from now. This will take a long process. There's been a huge amount of work just to get us to this point, and we haven't done a single thing yet to our building. The biggest task was to reduce our print collection enough so that the collection would fit back into the newly renovated stacks spaces. We have a 9-story tower. 8 stories of that contain our stacks collection of basically books and bound journals. 2 entire floors of that, and I'll show you that in a little bit, 25% of our stack space will not be available after the renovation because those 2 entire floors will be converted to student study and collaboration spaces. The stack's footprint on the remaining 6 floors will be reduced significantly to comply with the new, well, not new, but ADA requirements and safety requirements. And of course, this is a good thing. We really need to comply with these things. And we've needed this for a long time, so we're pretty pleased with it. We've used several methods as described last year to evaluate our physical holdings and made quite a few critical decisions on what to move out of the stacks and where those items would eventually go. Of the 870,000 items that were in our stacks, evaluating duplicate copies and old editions led us to just over 16,000 items that we could remove. There was one point, I think, in the late 60s, early 70s, where we ordered 2 copies of everything, which was interesting, but we found all of those extra copies. And by clearing out our campus storage, our library remote storage facility on campus of outdated government documents and material formats that were clearly not used anymore, we were able to move items from our stacks into that remote storage facility and retain 166,000 items from our collection. So those are items that we've retained. So those totals account for a bit more than the 25% reduction we needed, so we should have more than enough room to move the remaining items back into the newly reconfigured stacks in 2028. Communication was also a key component of the renovation, and it continues. We've hosted several open forums with the different communities on campus, published many items in campus newsletters and all campus distributions, and included updates on our website. Additionally, library leaders and individual faculty liaisons have met with departments who were particularly concerned about not having access to our collection during the renovation timeframe. And many building adjustments have already taken place to address the needs of the student space that we are going to lose when the tower is closed. So as you can see, several office moves have already taken place, including mine. During the tower renovation, a significant amount of student study and collaboration space will be unavailable to them. And to find more space for them within our main building while the tower is being renovated, we needed to adjust the space that library employees and library functions occurred. So many employees whose responsibilities do not include directly interacting with library users or our physical materials are now working from home, typically 4 days a week. For those days that we need to come in, we have hoteling spaces that we reserve ahead of time so we have a space to work. And the spaces that we have reclaimed, which includes the entire technical services department, have been now repurposed for student use. We've also adjusted our circulation rules to allow essentially unlimited loans and renewals to faculty and students who want to check out and retain materials while the renovation occurs. And we created a new shelving location to use for returned materials and any new items that we purchase, because we assume those are probably likely useful for people over the next few years too. And of course, we continue to communicate with those affected by the renovation and the stacks closure. So what's coming up? The tower will close, we've determined, on December 13th at 5 p.m. That's the close of work day. That day, the day of graduation. That's exactly 1 month from today. And over the few weeks after that, a company will come in and box up and move out the entire collection within the stacks. We'll then have about a month to move the furniture that we want to retain and any fixtures and move those to different parts of the library to send them to storage or to send them to surplus. And near the end of March, the tower will officially close for construction and we'll no longer have access to it. And of course, we're trying to plan for any disruptions that might occur. So the primary purpose of this renovation, first of all, for compliance with applicable laws and a student focus. So when we're done, we'll have increased our student spaces significantly as shown here, including a brand new wellness space of 840 square feet. I did the percentages just this past week to figure those out, and I was really shocked at how much we're increasing some of those spaces for students. So here's some of the renditions. I'm going to go through these pretty quickly of what our design looks like so I can leave time for others. This is the new entrance. Currently, that white concrete wall goes all the way to the grass. So this is really the signature feature of the exterior renovation. It'll be a new fully compliant entrance and will allow us access from the main parking deck much easier. This is the interior of that entrance. You'll notice the stairwell that goes from the first floor to the second floor. The second floor will be all student spacing, will not have any stacks in it anymore. And on each side of this central corridor, from one end of the library all to the other, will be our instructional, study, and gathering spaces. And this is the artist's rendering of what will be inside of the library. Note the tower stacks in the upper right or upper left, that levels 2 and 9 are going to be completely student study and learning spaces. And on the picture to the right, you can see the little orange areas will be our instructional spaces, which can be subdivided into different areas also. And these slides will be available on the Hoover site afterwards, so you'll be able to see them a little clearer too. So that's all I have for our renovation at UNC Greensboro. We're really looking forward to it. We're a bit nervous. It's coming up really quick. A lot of decisions have been made and a lot of decisions still need to be made, but we're really looking forward to the end result. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Amara Bridger Wilson. I am the collection management librarian at Northern Michigan University in Marquette, Michigan. So our library renovation, so NMU is a smallish public master's comprehensive institution. We have about 7,000 on-campus students. And much like the UNC Greensboro project that Terry was talking about, a lot of what was driving this project was bringing together different student-centered services on campus. And our space hadn't been renovated since 1972, so it gave off mid-century vibes. But not in a cool way. Though I personally miss the furniture. What we're getting is much less resilient and not as sturdy. But I'll talk about that in a little bit. So our renovation started in December 2023. And I'll talk a little bit about that process. Our expected completion is December 2025. And one of the things that our Dean of Libraries wants is minimum disruption of services. So she wants us all back in the new library, ready to go by January 2026. So that is one of the challenges that we are facing as well, which I'll talk about. So the move happened between the end of the semester. Our move started on the day of our winter commencement as well, and lasted about a month to the first day of the semester, of the winter semester. And so there were contracts for 2 moving companies. So one company moved the books and one company moved everything else. And facilities, our facilities department was the organization on campus that was supposed to coordinate those 2 entities. And for the most part, the library wasn't really looped into that process. And so that was our first issue, was that the communication between facilities, the 2 moving groups, and our library director and me, who was supposed to be coordinating the move of the collection, was less than ideal. And so that was one of the things that we had to deal with first, is the chain of command of information. And eventually the facilities people were like, we don't want anything to do with it anymore. Please don't talk to us. Just talk to this person over here. And so I was looped in. But by that time, there were things that could have gone a little bit more smoothly if I had been looped in earlier. So the move was scheduled over a 3-week period, 1 week in December before the Christmas holiday and New Year's, and 2 weeks at the beginning of January. The company that was moving the books was from downstate Michigan. We're in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan in December into January. So there was weather and there were holidays, and the person who was coordinating the move on the moving side for the books, he got fired over the Christmas break, and we're still not quite sure why, but they came back in January, and the main contact person that we had been working with no longer worked for the company. So that was another fun challenge. And really, we were on a timeline, unlike Terry's project, where the renovation isn't supposed to start until March. Our renovation was driven by the asbestos abatement schedule. So they were planning on starting the asbestos abatement the third week of January. So we had to have everything removed and out of the building by that time so that so they could do their next step. So it started pretty well. The guy who had been the main contact with the moving company had moved the library before. He had a system, and it seemed to be going well. When they came back from the January break and he was gone, and there was a new guy, and he had never moved the library, and he had really no idea what he was doing, things got a little sloppy. So one of the things that we found out when the books were shelved in the temporary space was that there was a lot of misshelving. So, and we are still finding areas of the collection that were misshelved, and we have been having to rearrange the shelving pretty consistently since January, and we're still at it. So for those of you who were here last year, I talked about one of the strange parts of the move was, so our collection went to storage, and we were temporarily housed in what used to be the campus medical center / old dorm. And so it was not a space that was meant to be a library. There was no open space. It was very cut off and very blocky. It's also an awkward space on campus where we don't get a lot of foot traffic. It's on the way to nowhere. So students have no reason to come. And so that has been our other problem, versus the library, our real library, the library that's being renovated, is literally a place where students would cut through, and it was a place that they were always around, and so even if they didn't know they needed something in the library, they were already there. And so we've been trying to do a variety of things to attract students to the library and or going out into campus to meet them with mixed results. The other major challenge that we had in the winter semester was confusing or absent signage. So when the movers, when the construction company started the asbestos abatement, they put a big sign on the outside of the library saying, "Library closed." And I immediately panicked, and I was like, that sign has to come down, and it has to say, "Library temporarily relocated." But it had been put up so fast, and you know, just the appearance of the building looked closed, right? And so we hadn't anticipated how people would interpret that. So there was this rumor on campus that we had to fight against, that the library was no longer available. So our new signage for this building that we were temporarily located in didn't come in until about March, and with the weather and whatnot, it wasn't put up until about April. So I feel like we've been in a constant state of doing outreach now to convince people that we were still there. And every time we do any sort of thing on campus or we go into classrooms, we always are trying to drive home the point that we are not closed, we are open. And then the other issue that I talked about last year, which is still an issue, is that the storage space that we have for the collection is completely unconditioned. And so I requested monitoring equipment in December and January to track temperature and relative humidity. As of yesterday, they installed them. They knew I was going to stand up here and say that I was still waiting. So we finally got that in, and now I'm trying to figure out what the best way to use that data to convince the administration to do something about those spaces. Because even when we move back into the building, a certain percentage of our collection will still stay in storage. And then we had some wacky drainage issues and water issues, which, you know, we had one incident over 4th of July weekend, because of course, holiday. And we were lucky that a student worker was down retrieving books the moment that the pipe leaked. So she was there, she panically called the circulation desk, and we were able to address it very quickly. But it sort of underscored the need for monitoring. And the facilities department, we don't have library facilities, right? Our facilities department is campus wide, and they've been pretty dismissive about our concerns about water and environmental control. And so after the water came down on the books, they were like, oh, that's never happened before, and I'm sure it won't happen again, right? And I'm like, but we need a plan. And that's something that I've been working with both our staff as well as trying to get the facilities folks on board, saying that, you know, if we're going to keep our collection in storage, we need a plan if something happens. So one of the things that we were concerned about was ensuring services and resources, like Terry said, you know, making sure that students have study space and that we are offering things for them. So as you'll see in these pictures, this is the old waiting room for the health center that we've tried to convert to a library in the best way possible. So we have a circulation area, we have 2 or 3 public computers, we have some limited displays and browsing. As materials are returned, we don't immediately reshelve them, send them back to storage. We try to sort of have a curated collection so that there is some browsing possibility for folks that are coming in. Printing was relocated to a temporary space it was an old dorm floor, right? So the study rooms are all old dorm rooms. We moved stuff over from our library, whiteboards, seating, whatnot. The one thing that we had to do was take the doors off the study rooms, though, because there wasn't any way to keep an eye on the study rooms. So now they're doorless, which has deterred some students from using them. So that's been an issue. We repurposed our COVID workflow to allow for physical materials to be requested, and that's been going very smoothly, actually, I think. Students go down to storage 3 to 5 times a day to retrieve items, and we have a system of contacting people to pick them up. And then one of the things I talked about last time was increasing our ebook packages and our journal packages so that there's more electronic resources, so that if people felt constrained by requesting physical materials, they had digital materials. But there has been impacts of moves. So our circulation of physical items is down by 85%, which is a huge difference, more than I would have anticipated. Oddly enough, our ILL is down as well, and I don't know whether that is an impact of people just thinking that we're not doing it anymore. Our study room usage is down 70%. And reference interactions are down. So we did try to do roving reference. We have librarians that serve reference in other places, and we have big signs saying, hey, ask a librarian. But we're still having less reference traffic. So the questions we're asking ourselves now at this point is, what else can we do to bring people into the library or bring the library to the people? We have a year left of this project, so how are we going to manage this? And then trying to plan for when we are open, are people going to come back? And how are we going to ensure that people come back into the library? And I think one of it is it's going to be there and it's going to be open and the weather's going to be cold and they're going to cut through like they always did. So I think that is less of an issue, actually. So my primary goal for the next year is to figure out what moves back into the library. So much like Terry's project, we have less room for stacks in the new library, partly because we're bringing in other student services. We have the Writing Center coming in and all-campus tutoring and the archives and other kinds of student-facing services, which is great, which I'm excited about. But we have to keep about 50% of our collection in storage and bring another 50% back in. And so we're figuring out how to do that. As we're deciding the parameters, most likely it's going to be date and usage. We've run into some problems with how things have been cataloged and formatted in Alma, because when we're pulling reports, our numbers are coming back wonky and not accurate. So our cataloging librarian is working on cleaning up the catalog so we can even start running those reports accurately. And then creating these niche collections. We have specialty collections that we're hoping to bring in sort of in total so that people can browse. We're still working on what the stack situation is going to be and what the shelves are going to look like. And I have mock-ups of furniture in my email that I have to review and get back to the architect. So we're at that part. We're talking about finishes, which is exciting. The future of the reference piece is something that we're considering in the architecture plans. We had planned on a combined reference circulation desk, but given our reference numbers and how we're not getting reference questions, we're revisiting what reference might look like in the new building and what the best use of the librarian time is. And then how we can partner with our new neighbors in the library, like I said, the writing center, the tutoring, the art gallery, things that are coming in there, as well as the academic departments that are going to be placed a floor above the library. What are some opportunities there to do programming and things like that?
That's mine. Oh, I went too far. You had already put me there. My name is Patrick Stanley. I'm the Collections Logistics Librarian at the University of Georgia, and I am so glad that our renovation is completed, but sad because I won't be able to be on future updates to the renovation panels. So we finished ours up actually at the beginning of the fall semester. We, like has been heard, mainly started because we needed a new HVAC system. Been installed in 1968. They were going to have to tear down all of the ceiling tiles, and they figured we're going to have to move the collection to do that. So let's also add in new carpet, new furniture, more study space, etc. So we, I put 415,000 items, but actually it was probably closer to about 500,000 items that we started with. There were some wonkiness with the catalog, as was previously mentioned. We ended up decreasing to 71,000. So this picture over here on the right is kind of an illustration of what it looked like. Very similar to a lot of academic institutions, right? Very thick or densely packed shelves, not much daylight getting through any of them. So I will go ahead and say, renovation was a huge thing, right? There was furniture, there was budget stuff, there was dealing with the builders and the designers. My sole purpose was to deal with the physical collection. So that's all I'm going to talk about, which is why that's all I have pictures of up there. So when we moved stuff back, a few things happened. Number one, the aisles are now ADA compliant. Seems like a common thread. We all have non-ADA compliant libraries that need to be made ADA compliant. So that's good. Secondly, that top left corner you can see, we used to have one more shelf on every single, what we call a ladder, right? A ladder would be the vertical shelves. We removed one. And the main reason for that is that some of those journals that aren't folios are just a little bit too tall, and they were laid on their back and they're impossible to find. And we found that by getting rid of one of those shelves and losing that space, we can actually make it more findable, because if you look even with the journals, I much rather look through those shelves for journals than those shelves for journals. There's less on the shelf, there's more space. We intentionally only moved books back and filled them about half to 2/3 full. Now the reason for this, there's a few reasons. One is make stuff easier to find, right? You have less to look through. We could get rid of a lot of the homogeny of similar colored library bindings and stick with some of the newer current stuff. One of the big things that we used in bringing stuff back was currency, and turns out stuff that we've purchased after 2000 is less likely to be library bound, so we get more colors, it's easier to see. It's more likely that a student or faculty or whomever is going to also serendipitously fall upon a new title that they didn't know was there, in addition to being able to find the title that they were there, or that they're looking for, which was questionable whether they could find either in the past. The other thing is shifting. So our student shelvers probably spend 50 to 60% of their time shifting our shelves. That will not be a problem here, because if anything, You have to shift a few shelves at a time, but we're also going to be instituting what I'll talk about in a little bit, a policy where there'll be kind of more regular weeding. And when I say weeding, I just mean removing from this and moving to our offsite facility to keep the shelves looking like this rather than turning back into that. So obstacles, right? We all sit down, we all talk about all the obstacles that we can foresee, but it's the unexpected obstacles that really throw a wrench in the system. The first two kind of go together. Library mover communication about their process. It seems really basic, but it turns out they came and they started doing a whole bunch of stuff that we didn't understand how they were going to do it, and we hadn't really prepared properly for it. And so we had a lot of extra work. They had a lot of extra work. There was a lot of headaches. I was trying to think of like, how do I say this? Because everybody's going to use different library users, have different situation. Going back, I would encourage strongly anybody that's doing this and working with the library mover to ask them to spell out step by step what they're doing. Not just, we're moving things on this day and we're doing this. Tell me how you're going to define what's getting moved. Tell me how many things you're expecting on this day. Case in point, we had 2 project managers. We only spoke to one before the move began. So there was one that was going to talk about, or there was one that was there to set up the move, and then there was one to actually do the move. So just, I mean, that simple fact completely threw a bunch of loops. The other end of that, though, catalog inaccuracy. So we had about 60,000 items that were not in our catalog, but we have. So about 3 days into the library movers being there and getting stuff set up, they said, hey, we need 16,000 more shelves to put this stuff on. And so we very frantically and very messily found that space. We won't talk about how or where we had to hide bodies, but they were hidden and the books were there. Largely, we had to push back and double stack a lot of our offsite shelving and try to keep it. It was a mess. In any case, it worked. We made it happen. The second big thing, and this is more internal. So renovation timelines versus normal library timelines. So a good example of this is because of the catalog inaccuracies, the books we were moving to one area in an effort to move back, we wanted to take an inventory of, because there was a huge amount of stuff we couldn't find. There was stuff that we moved that we hadn't planned on moving. So we wanted to get an accurate inventory for at very least those 70,000 items that we're moving back. Well, when we started talking with the department that normally does inventory, their process was going to be about 6 to 8 months, and we were talking about a process of 2 weeks. And so it wasn't just, hey, we're going to go do our thing. They pushed back hard because this was a process that they had developed over years and they felt like was perfect. Thing is they developed it a book cart at a time sitting at a desk, not hundreds of thousands of items at a time very, very quickly. So what I thought was going to exist there was a general understanding in the library that like a renovation is not normal library operating procedure and we need to move things through things quickly. And almost to a T, that was not the case. So there, my encouragement would be to get administration to make sure that departments are on board with do what needs to be done, not what we think best practice is. We spent weeks just having meetings about how to take an inventory, and in that amount of time could have been done with the inventory and still ended up doing the inventory the way that we needed to do it, rather than taking 8 months, because the whole renovation process was only 9 months. So it wouldn't have gone well. Those sort of things kind of kept coming up over and over again, though. So the next steps. All of this, our offsite storage, as I mentioned last year, we're switching into a densification based off of size and not by call number. And so we're going through, we have about 1.5 million to 1.7 million items in our offsite storage. That's going to almost double by the time that we're done with it. We've added some new shelving in there. We've had new shelves fabricated. There's a bunch of stuff happening with that. But that is ongoing. One of the big reasons that's ongoing and where a lot of the other materials are going to come from is that we are creating a larger strategic plan for our main library. So all of this happened at our science library. Our main library is 7 stories and is packed even more tightly than the science library was. We have no idea what's in there. We need a lot of the space. There's overflow shelving happening. So we are within that kind of larger strategic plan, moving a bunch of stuff around that's going to help us kind of create a situation that looks more like that on the general shelving. One of the other big things, this is sort of the thing that I'm most excited about, mainly because I'm sort of overseeing it, is we're using the 4th floor of our science library, which was just renovated, as kind of a sandbox to experiment with a more user-directed OpenStax methodology, right? So in the past, basically what's occurred is that when stuff gets sent to our offsite repository, it goes there and it only comes back if it's requested. And then when it gets returned, it goes right back there. Because we're switching away from Alma into Folio, and there's a lot more open use and things that can be built with that, we're going to begin really focusing in on when something is checked out, maybe it's 2, maybe it's 3 times, we're still figuring out, it'll automatically switch within our system and it'll go back into the OpenStax. And then we will go on to that kind of shelf by shelf where we, instead of running reports, we will do things largely based off the aesthetic. Does it need to be repaired? Does it look old? Does it look grungy? Does it look like something that isn't getting checked out? Is there dust still in front of it showing that it just hasn't moved? And having our students pull those things rather than librarians kind of wasting time on, let's look at the data and try to use past data to predict future use, which just doesn't work. And so then with all of that, we are also working to create a manual so that these future renovations within our larger plan will go hopefully smoother. And that's it.